I'm joined today by Les Leopold, who is co-founder and director of the Labor Institute in New York City, and author of Runaway Inequality, an activist's guide to economic justice. It's so great to talk to you, and this is an issue of such paramount importance. When we talk about wealth and income inequality, we should first sort of understand what we're talking about. So tell us first how these measurements are taken and what data we can look at to figure out how bad it is.
Well, the data I like to look at is the ratio of the top 100 CEO pay and the average worker. Back in 1970, the ratio was 45 to 1. $1 for the average worker, 45 for a top 100 CEO. Now it's 829 to 1. And the kind of scary part is if you ask Americans what they think it is, they still think it's 1970, that the ratio is somewhere between 40 and 60 to 1. It's 829 to 1. So I think that tells us, and it's rising. So I think that tells us quite a bit about the how much inequality has increased over the last generation.
And we've talked on the program about the increased productivity that we are seeing from workers in the United States, but that since the late 1970s, early 1980s on, those productivity increases have gone overwhelmingly towards corporations, executives, and those who were already sort of at the top of the economic ladder. What triggered this? In other words, why did this start happening in the late 1970s?
Well, as you point out, there was a phenomenal shift. If you look at the chart between productivity and average wages rose all the way from World War II to about 1980, and then the two lines split apart. It's the biggest shift in economic fortune that I think I've ever seen. And the reason was that we went to an entirely different policy regime, which in the book we call the Better Business Climate model. And the essence of that model was cut taxes primarily on the wealthy, cut regulations on business, and cut back social spending so that people would go out and work as opposed to rely on government handouts, or so they said. That Better Business Climate model was accepted by the entire economics establishment. I was in graduate school then. I saw it just rip through our school, and both political parties. Now, the kind of dirty little secret of the Better Business Climate model that they didn't describe is that there's a real difference between deregulation of the real economy and deregulation of finance. They were talking about breaking up, monopolies like AT&T and Bell Telephone at that time, and airlines and trucking. What happened was deregulation of finance took hold, and that sent wages in the financial sector through the roof because they were able to basically strip mine the rest of the economy. I call it financial strip mining. And that happened at such a furious pace that average wages stalled even while productivity was rising, rising, and rising.
And when we talk about this divergence that has taken place, we also have to talk about the sort of idea of the United States as the land of opportunity and the American dream, where people pull themselves up by the bootstraps that they may not even own or can afford. And when we talk about productivity in that sense, it seems that there is a great opportunity as a worker in the United States to produce significant amounts of value, be it in services or goods for corporations. But it seems that the retention of any of that productivity and value created from work is what people don't have increasingly the opportunity to retain. I mean, is that a sort of accurate way of looking at the opportunity that exists in the United States?
Well, yeah, we have a couple of chapters in the book that measure American exceptionalism compared to other countries. Just
Right.
How well are we doing? And one of the big measurements is the measurement of upward mobility, where they look intensely at 7 countries. And the odds in the United States of your kids doing better than you, it's 50-50 in the United States. We're last on the list. In Denmark, which is first, it's 7 to 1. The odds are 7 to 1 that your kids will do better than you're doing. And that's because Denmark has the much less inequality than the United States has. It also shows up in poverty statistics. There are 27 countries that were measured. the United States ranks second to last. And again, on that list, the countries in Northern Europe that have the least inequality have virtually eliminated childhood poverty. So there are real consequences for letting inequality become runaway inequality. We've always had inequality. That's just a fact of life. That's not what we're talking about. When the ratio was 45 to 1, there were many wealthy people in America. They lived quite well. But 829 to 1, now you're talking about the stagnation and impoverishment of the rest of the population. We really are in danger of splitting in two.
I'd love to hear a little bit from you about the numbers regarding the racial wage and wealth gap that exists. We know generally about the wealth and inequality gap, but it's even more pronounced when we look at non-white communities in the US, is it not?
Yes, and here we see overlaying problems. We have a legacy of institutional discrimination in the United States. Blacks were prevented from buying homes through the Federal Housing Administration. They wouldn't allow blacks to buy homes in the suburbs, and they couldn't get guaranteed mortgages and so on. But what we now have is it's doubled up. We have a college graduate, a black person who is a college graduate, has less wealth than a white high school dropout.
And when you say that, you're talking about mean, median, how is that being measured?
Median.
Median.
So the right smack in the middle, not an average. So we have another devastating statistic that I think is even more troubling, which is starting in when inequality took off in 1980. There was a tremendous rise in financial sector wages due to the deregulation. There was no premium before that, whether you worked on Wall Street or worked in GM. It didn't matter. Then there a huge premium. Wages almost doubled in the financial sector as opposed to the non-financial sector. But another thing happened. The prison population exploded. And we now have more prisoners in the United States than any other country in the world, and a higher rate per 100,000 citizens. So we have the highest rate of incarceration and the most prisoners of any country, including North Korea, Russia, China, Cuba, all the places that we've pointed the finger at. And it's now become more racialized. There always was a gap between the rate of black incarceration and white incarceration, but the gap was relatively small. Now it's very large. So Black Americans are paying an enormous price for runaway inequality. Another factor in this same statistic has to do, my contention is that when the idea of cutting back on social spending became the thing starting in 1980 or so, it ended all poverty programs. The idea of intervening with black youth in inner cities to get them jobs, the kind of stuff that was done in the 60s and 70s, sometimes successfully, sometimes not so successfully, but we were trying. The war on poverty, I believe, turned into prison. That is our new world war on poverty. Think about it first, and it has consequences in terms of policing. Think about Eric Garner for a second,
right?
The gentleman who was killed in Staten Island by the police during a police arrest. What was he doing? He was working. He was selling loose cigarettes. That was his attempt to try to get out of poverty. So there's a real high correlation, I think, between this better business climate model, runaway inequality, the rise of the prison population, and the tension we're seeing today between Black Americans and the police.
Last thing I want to touch on in the limited time we have left, what's the connection between climate change and wealth and income inequality?
Very good question, and a tough one. But we found that poll data shows that when people are insecure, when the average American is insecure, their support for climate change goes down. We also have found that because of this financial strip mining, the process, which we go over in some detail in the book, of how money is siphoned away from corporations into Wall Street, it makes corporations reduce or minimize their expenditures on energy reduction, pollution, all those kinds of things that take place. So the insecurity caused by runaway inequality plus the financial strip mining really makes it more difficult to achieve climate change reductions, the kind of which we need. Also, the attacks on the idea of siphoning money out of corporations. For example, right now, hedge funds are trying to get General Motors to cough up some of the $25 billion in cash, is a travesty. We bailed out General Motors so that it could produce the best environmentally friendly cars in the world. We wanted General Motors to succeed and to become greener and greener. But the hedge funds finance is attacking Wall Street, and it's attacking General Motors for the benefit of Wall Street to try to get that $25 billion, into their pockets instead of into the development of better and better cars. That's going on all over the country, and we're going to pay very dearly for it. Runaway inequality has severe consequences for us, and we're going to have to address it.
I'll remind the audience the book is Runaway Inequality, an activist's guide to economic justice. We've been speaking with the book's author, Les Leopold. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.